Okay, welcome everyone. We're back again at the Alshech Academy, and we're continuing our series on the parashas, and this is the second class on Parshat Mikaitz, and we're talking about Pasuk Tet in the Parshat, where the Sarah Mashkim, the Paro's butler, who is now mentioning to Paro the fact that if you need a dream interpreter, I have the guy for you. And the pasuk says, "Vayidaber Sarah Mashkim el Paro lemo." The Sarah Mashkim mentioned to Paro the following: "Et chata'ai ani maskir hayom." My sins I remind today. I'm bringing up my sins. So this is Moshe Omro leimor leyira'eh bilti tzodek. Again, this is the famous class old question that why does it say lemor? He said something to repeat. There's no repeating here. Everything he's saying is just going to be mentioned. He's saying it directly to Paro, and nobody has to repeat it. It says, "Et chata'ai ani maskir." My sins I am mentioning. Why is he saying I'm mentioning my sins today? Obviously it's today. Today is today, and there's no yesterday. It says, "Achine amru rabotenu." So this is a very interesting thing that Rav Moshe is going to go through now. That the Sarah Mashkim, he didn't really want to mention Yosef. He didn't really, we'll see soon in Rav Moshe why he didn't want to mention Yosef, either because he didn't want to do him a favor, or because he didn't really know if he was actually good at his job of interpreting dreams. Maybe it was just a one-time fluke. But either way, the Sarah Mashkim didn't mention Yosef straight away at all. Only very, very late on, when he saw, it says, the Midrash says, that when he saw that Paro's soul was about to depart him, he was like, oh, if Paro dies, then who knows if the new king is going to keep me in my job. So suddenly he had an invested interest to keep this Paro alive so that he can keep his job. So basically he really pushed it with waiting for the last minute in order to mention Yosef as a candidate. So the fact that he didn't mention it straight away really pained the king. He let the king go through so much suffering and so much emotional turmoil, that so much so that he was about to pass out from all of this. He was about to die from all of this stress and anxiety. He waited to mention the fact that Yosef might be a solution until Paro's soul was about to leave. Now that he waited this long to mention it to Paro, and Paro was almost about to die from anxiety, he therefore has to mitigate the fact that he didn't mention this solution earlier, and he waited until now. So in order to address that fact, he says as follows: Al nata shemeni. I want you to not blame me. Don't find me guilty for not mentioning anything until now. I can only mention the fact that I know Yosef if I mention my sins. And I didn't want to do that, to mention my sins, because I was embarrassed. I'm ashamed of my sins. So Paro should understand that I really didn't want, this wasn't my first go-to plan to mention the fact that I know Yosef, because of the fact that I will have to mention Paro katzaf alavadav, that Paro was angered on his servants, rual chata'ai klomar, because it was based on the fact that I sinned and failed at my job. I pushed off the mentioning Yosef ad efes tikun zulat ze adata. It was only when I really saw that there is no other solution, and I see that you're almost about to die from anxiety, that's when I saw that, okay, I've got to mention it at all costs. So what does that mean? So he's saying as follows, how do we read this passage according to this Pshat? The Sarah Mashkim is mitigating the fact that he waited until then to mention Yosef. Lemor, because he's saying as follows. Lemor, if I want to tell you the following thing, I'm going to have to mention my sins today. And I waited until today, until now, because it's something I didn't want to do. I didn't want to bring up my sins. The rabbis in the Midrash say, Et chata'ai, my sins, plural. What's his sins? He should have said my sin, which is the sin of getting a fly into the goblet of the king. So what's the double sin? The rabbi says as follows. My sins is the fact that I sinned to Yosef, not that I sinned to you. He's mentioning the fact that Yosef asked me a simple favor 2 years ago to mention him to Paro, and 2 years have passed and you haven't thought about him, you haven't managed to come forward to the king, even though you see him every day. So that was one sin that he is mentioning right now by the fact that he hasn't said anything until now. And another sin, what's the second sin? Shalom yiharti lagid lecha data, the fact that I didn't mention anything to you, Paro, until the last minute. So that's the Midrash. The Midrash says chata'ai, what's the double sins? The sin of not mentioning Yosef, the favor to Yosef being pushed off, and mentioning the solution for Paro pushed off. But this is a very strange thing, because really what's the chata'im that he's really referencing to in the Parshat level? It's talking about the fact, the sin of messing up his butler job. So that says Rav Moshe, Lama hinichu chat'o hamur lamala. Why are the rabbis leaving out the main sin that he's referring to? Chat'u mashke melech Mitzrayim, that the mashke melech Mitzrayim, that he sinned with the fly. V'halchu levakesh Yosef al Paro, and they're looking for like other types of sins which don't seem to be the main point here. V'od shelafachot haya lahem, even though you want to talk about those sins as well, you can add them in and say there's 3 sins. V'yu shlosha. So the Rav Moshe says, I'll tell you why. Amnam hem ra'u shnei dvarim. Echad amro chata'ai lashon rabim. The fact that the pasuk mentions 2 sins is already indicating that we're definitely not talking about only the sin of what he got incarcerated for to begin with, because that was only one sin. V'oto avon sha'alav anesar haya echad, v'od ki lo haya hu hachoteh. This is a very interesting thing that Rav Moshe already says last week, that the fact that the fly was found in the goblet isn't the fault really of the head butler, who was like the one in charge of all of the king's beverages, because obviously he didn't prepare this specific drink. It was one of his guys, one of his servants, one of the guys in the team. Rak hamashke shetachad yado. Kasher katam lamala, Rav Moshe takes note of this in the Parshat last week, where it says Chatu mashke melech Mitzrayim. It doesn't say the Sara mashkim, because obviously it wasn't the Sara. The Sara is the head of the team. He's the main chef. He's the chef of the drinks. V'lo amar Chatu Sara mashkim v'Sara afim. Al ken bikshu lo chata'im acherim. So therefore, because it's not really his sin, so we want to say, and this mention of 2 sins, plural, as opposed to the 1 sin. That's why the rabbis say we're not even talking about that sin. We're talking about the sins of delaying the mention of Yosef and delaying the solution to Paro. It doesn't say Paro katzaf on me. It says that meaning the anger was on his servants. So what he's saying is that Paro got angry at me because I'm the head of the drinks team. But I didn't actually sin. The anger was directed to me, but the sin was not directed to me. The sin was actually the sin of one of the low-ranking members of the team. But obviously the head of the team takes the hit, even though it's not his fault, because Paro doesn't deal with the lower guys. Paro gets angry. I've got a fly in my drink. Who's responsible? Who do I deal with when it comes to drinks? The head of the team. The manager, the chef, the boss, he takes the hit for the team, because at the end of the day, that's his job, to take responsibility for the quality of the products. So that's why it explains the idea of what the sins it's talking about when he says, I'm mentioning my sins. Ulefi zeh omro lemor. So now Moshe says another explanation of what it means when the pasuk says, "Vayedaber sar mashkim lemor." Ki vayedaber lo la'avat Yosef. Rak kadei el paro lemor mevukasho. So what's he saying? That he's saying as follows: that we mentioned now there was two sins to that the Sarah Mashkim did by the fact that he didn't mention Yosef until now. First of all, he did something wrong for Yosef and also for Paro. So the pasuk is telling me now the fact that he did eventually mention Yosef's name to Paro was not out of a favor to Yosef. He doesn't care about Yosef. He doesn't love Yosef. He doesn't care about Yosef. He doesn't like him. The only reason he's doing it is for Paro. So what we're saying is, he's only saying this for Paro's sake, not for Yosef's sake. Or another way you can understand, in a different way of understanding, that the Sarah Mashkim did care about Yosef. Ki chash lama shechashash Yosef ba'omro ki gunov gunavti. So now, Yosef said, don't you worry, if you put in my name to the king, if you mention me to the king, don't worry that they're going to start looking into why I'm incarcerated and what I'm doing here, and they'll start checking his criminal record. Because Yosef is saying as follows: my criminal record is clean. There's nothing I did wrong. Ki gunov gunavti, I was kidnapped from my hometown. Ki lo chinam samuni babor. Gunov gunavti gampo. Yosef said, not only was I kidnapped, also here as well I'm innocent, and I was just put into the pit without any due court or verification of guilt. I was literally just dumped in here without any without any process of judge or jury. So what he's saying is, when I mentioned Yosef, he was with me in the jail. He was with me in that dungeon. But you should know, the only one that was actually guilty in that dungeon was me, because Yosef himself, he was actually innocent. He was there with us, but he wasn't actually incarcerated, because someone that's incarcerated means that the justice system, the judges, the courts put him in jail, or the king put him in jail, and he would be in chains as well. But Yosef wasn't in chains; he was there as a free man. He was actually a servant to the Sarat Bachim, the head butcher or the head executioner, and therefore he was in the prison of his master, but he wasn't there as an inmate. It didn't happen through a king or a judge. Because he didn't actually sin. So actually, according to this, he's saying that I waited until now. So what he's saying is that I waited 2 years exactly since he asked me to mention him. So really when he says Hayom, according to this explanation, the Sarah Mashkim is saying, I really let Yosef down because he's innocent, and I waited 2 years to the day. I'm remembering now what day I got out of jail 2 years ago to the day, already 2 years ago to plus 3 days or minus 3 days because he came out 3 days later. So basically, according to this explanation, the Sarah Mashkim really feels bad that he let Yosef down on such a level. So now the pasuk continues. This is the words of the Sarah Mashkim to Paro. Paro katzaf alavadav. Paro was angry at his servant. Vayiten oti b'mishmar bet hasarat habachem. He put me into the jail of the head butcher. Oti ve'etzarafim. Me and the baker, and the head baker. Rabbi Sim Lev says from Moshe, Ki b'omro katzav alavadav. If he starts off mentioning the fact that Paro was angered at both of his servants, alavadav plural, so he's talking about him and the baker. Hayala lomar vayiten otanu b'mishmar. When he talks about the result of the anger, which is the incarceration, it should say that straight away. V'lo yazkir et atzmo levado tchila. He shouldn't mention himself separately. V'chazer v'omer oti pam shenit. So he says, now it also says, v'yiten oti b'mishmar. So there's two questions. Paro got angered at both of his servants, the mashkim and the ofim. But then it says, v'yiten oti b'mishmar b'tadar. Put me in. Why are you mentioning himself only? And then when he does go on and mention the other one, the other guy, he says, oti, he mentions, me and the other guy. He already mentioned me. Says Rav Moshe, that's very needs explanation. Number two, we have to understand, what does the pasuk say? He says, together with us, the Sar Mashkim told Paro, along with us in the jail, who was there? Nar, Ivri, Eved l'Sar Tabachim. He was a youngster, he was a Hebrew, and he was a servant to the head butcher. Why is it important to mention all of these characteristics to describe Yosef? Why does it say V'sham itanu, he was with us? Why didn't you say and there in the jail there was Yosef? So now Rav Moshe is going to tell us what conundrum the Sarah Mashkim was facing while he's talking to Paro, because he doesn't know how to describe Yosef's ability in dream interpreting, because on the one hand he can go all in and be like, yeah, Yosef's your man, he's the one to bring, he'll know it, but the thing is, what if Yosef doesn't really know what he's doing? On the other hand, if he just says he's not good, then Paro will say, why are you mentioning him? He's not useful. So that's why he's treading on a thin string and a tight rope here to know what to say in order to be helpful, but not to put himself on the line, having endorsed Yosef too much. So he says as follows: Oli imamar shu baki pater chalamot. If I say that he's an expert and he's the one to rely on, I'm putting myself at risk doublefold. Yesh shtayim ra'ot. Number one, the risk is shetigdal ashmati im yimtza baki. If the truth is, and he's found to be a professional at interpreting dreams, then the guilt, the fact that I didn't mention Yosef's existence and ability to help Paro until now would become even more of a sin. Umar Gam, the Rabbatena, as we mentioned before, the rabbis say that he waited, not only he suddenly remembered a little bit into the discussion, he waited until the last minute when Paro was almost about to die. So that's really, if Yosef is found to be the number one expert, and you knew about him all along, why have you waited until now to mention him? Number two problem that he'll be found guilty of, maybe he's actually not good at what he does, and I'm going to make this whole thing of taking him out of jail and bringing him as the great savior, the one that can solve the problem, and really he's no idea what he's talking about. It was a one-time fluke. And I'll be found to been lying to Paro. I can't say that he's not professional. Maybe he will be found professional, or they'll be punished for not saying that he's professional. In order to avoid these scenarios and being guilty either way, he had to basically put himself on the fence. He played it safe. He's like, I don't know, maybe yeah, maybe not. He probably is good, but maybe not. So he's not putting his neck on the line too much. I'm going to see now, Ramosh is going to explain this and how it fits into the psukim. So he says as follows: V'etchil v'amar Paro katzaf, lomar hinei yesh panim lomar shu pater chalamot baki. Let me suggest a thought process or a way of thinking why I would say that he is good at interpreting dreams. The fact that he was able to predict that I'm going to be exonerated and taken out, whereas the baker is going to be killed, like executed. Ki yada she'hamelech yoter ka'us al sar ha'ofim me'al sar mashkim. So you could suggest that the reason Yosef predicted the outcome that way was because he read the headlines, he saw that Paro put both of his butlers into jail, and he saw that the main anger of the king was against the baker. Right? Because we know that Rashi says, because the baker, it's easier for a fly to fall into a drink than for stones and pebbles to be found inside of a cake. So Yosef, when he was presented with a dream, he didn't actually interpret the dream. He was just giving his commentary, his prediction on what the events will happen based on his assumption of Paro's anger levels at these two servants. That's why here, when it comes to the baker, he said he'll be executed, and when it came to the mashke, he said he'll be exonerated. We can't say, says Rav Moshe. The Sarah Mashke was telling Paro, I'll tell you why we're not going to say that it was a prediction or an assumption that he made based on what the information that he had on the king's anger levels, because if he wouldn't have known that the king was more angry at the baker. The way it actually transpired was the other way around. The anger, Paro got angry at both equally. Not only was it equally, on the outside, it looked like Paro was more angry at the Sarah Mashkim, at the drinks guy. How would we say that? I was put into the jail first. I was put into prison more than him. As the Midrash says, me and him. So he's like the second, he's like added almost like an afterthought. So he brings here from the Paneach Raza, why would you say that the king would be angry at the drinks guy more than the baker's guy? So he says that he should have known that he knew he used to serve the king his drinks, whereas the baker was more of a kitchen guy. So he kind of knows the king's honor. He knows how important the king's honor is for the kingdom, and he knew that if the king starts getting his flies in his drink, then people will disrespect the king. So there's more expected of him in terms of having responsibility and knowing the ramifications that can come out of this event. So either way, what Moshe is saying to us is as follows, like we've been saying, that the Sarah Mashkim is telling Paro, I'm going to put forward a suggestion that would suggest that Yosef actually is good at interpreting dreams. Because the way he predicted what was going to happen was from the dream, not from a vague prediction based on his knowledge of the king's ways of doing things. Because Vayiten Otiba Mishmar, I was put into jail first, and I was the main person that was incarcerated, and he was only afterthought. Otiva Etzat of him, he was only after from the fact that he was only after. But still he predicted that the drinks guy will go out, will be exonerated, and the other guy will get killed. That shows that he obviously learned it from the dream, and it wasn't a unrelated prediction based on the king's palace events. So then the pasuk continues, and he says as follows: the Sarah Mashkim is continuing his narrative to Paro. He says, "V'nachal machalom b'layla echad." Anivahu. We both had a dream in one night. Anivahu, both me and him. Ish kepitron chalamo chalamnu. We both dreamt as the interpretation of our dreams. So he says as follows: so what can you say is, you could say that the time where the dream happened, whether the dream was by day or the dream was by night, the dream by night is maybe more connected to judgments and punishment. Because he says, but the dream happened at the same time. The dream, we both dreamt it in the night time. So the fact that he was able to differentiate between the two dreams and see that mine was exoneration and his was execution, shows that he actually knows what he's doing. So now that he's saying that Yosef is actually a professional, so he now needs to answer for the fact, needs to give account for the fact that he didn't mention him until now. Why didn't you offer this great solution to the king until now? On the other hand, if you looked at it from the other angle, just a minute, let me say, I don't know, maybe there's another way of looking at it. What would be the other way of looking at it? He didn't actually need to use wisdom to interpret our dreams. Why? Our dreams are very simple, very straightforward. Our dreams were so simple to interpret, it was almost as if the dream included the interpretation. In the dream of the butler, of the drinks guy, it says, in the dream it said that I see myself putting the goblet on Paro's hand. So that obviously indicates that he's going to be doing that. Whereas the baker in his dream saw the birds were eating the bread on top of his head. So that's quite indicative of the fact that he's going to have birds eating his flesh. So it's actually a very simple interpretation. You don't need to be a rocket scientist or a dream scientist to know it. So then he's saying another way I understand that it obviously doesn't seem to be that he knows what he's talking about, based on Yosef's character, on his qualifications. Because who is Yosef? Yosef is Nar. V'shamitanu, Nar is a youngster. Ivri is a Hebrew. Eved Asar Tabachem, he is a servant. Says Rav Moshe as follows. This is another suggestion from the Sarah Mashkim to Paro why he shouldn't take Yosef too seriously, and this is how he's mitigating the fact that he didn't think to mention Yosef until now. It's only an afterthought. He's like, I know this guy, maybe it's an off chance. He managed to interpret our dreams, but our dreams weren't a big deal. It doesn't seem like he knows what he's talking about. But now that we don't have any other options, let's give him a try. So why is he suggesting that Yosef doesn't know what he's talking about? Because how does anybody interpret dreams? What is the methods? There's a few different methods that one may use to interpret dreams. Number one, lo yibatzel la'achad me'arba b'chinot. That has to be one of four. Number one, liyato chacham gadol. He has to be very wise. Uberov chochmato, with his great wisdom, kiven el amitat kavanat hachalom ba'asharat hachokma. Using the pathways of wisdom, of being able to understand the essence of things and the point of the dream, it would mean to really dissect the message that is being expressed in the dream and being able to pinpoint what is the main ideas being described and being able to interpret it into an event or a prediction. So that's number one, great wisdom. Number two, or de kishuf, you can be a regular magician. And that would be another way using magic. Sorcery. Number three, using godly divine prophecy. That would be another way to figure out a dream. Number four, he would use astrology or stargazing. He will see in the stars what everybody's future holds. So then he can see, meaning he wouldn't actually interpret the dream. He would say, wait a minute, let me go and do some stargazing, and let me see what's your next events happening in your life. And I was like, oh, interesting, this guy's going to be taken out of jail. Oh, exactly, that's what the dream means. So I mean, it's kind of just using stargazing to and adding it into the dream, but that's not necessarily actually a tool. But again, that would be something that can be used. But he's saying about Yosef is that he didn't have any of these things. None of these things can be attributed to Yosef. He can't be a great wise man. He was a youngster. He's 17. He wasn't 17 at the time. At the time he was already 90. What was he? 28. But he's still young. Up until 40, you can't expect someone to be wise on that level. You can't say that he used sorcery because he was a Hebrew. In the land of the Hebrews, there's no sorcery like in Egypt. So that's not what he was using. V'gam lo navihu. He was also not a prophet. Why do I know he wasn't a prophet? Ki alo en sham mekom hitbodedut el hasagazo. In order to achieve prophecy, you need to be in solitude, meditative vibes of quietness, stillness of the mind. But he wasn't in that situation. Ki hu eved asar tabachim. He's in a butcher's house. He's in an executioner's house. He's in a place that's bustling and not a place that is full of calmness and peace of mind. It's a place full of distractions. So that's obviously not what he used. It's obviously also not stargazing. If he would use stargazing, he would have to find out our dates of birth and in which star we were born, etc. To know which constellation and which zodiac sign we belong to, etc. Only then would he be able to interpret it. But he didn't do that. We told him the dream. Immediately, without asking any other details, he already interpreted it. So therefore, he doesn't even have this tool. So that's really, the Ramosh has basically explained now, based on these psukim, what the Sarah Mashkim was doing here. He was staying on the fence in terms of the level of his endorsement and recommendation of Yosef's ability and his ability to help Paro in this situation. Peter was saying that not only that, the fact that the Sarah Mashkim was adding all of these information, all these details, actually he was thereby hiding a detail which was important to know. Because when Yosef interpreted the dreams, what did he tell them? He told them as follows: Lelohim pitronim. Hashem, the Lord, has the ability to interpret things. Saprunali, therefore tell me. Velulei hu baki uman. If not that he was professional, lo sha'al yisapru. He wouldn't ask them to tell him the dream. Meaning, Yosef knew that he has the ability to interpret dreams. As we know, Yosef was, he's the dream guy. He's got his own dreams. He's interpreting everyone else's dreams. He's the person the main dreamer of our history. And the fact that he asked the people to tell him the dreams indicates that he felt confident and he knew what he was talking about. So now, the king will say, why did you tell him? So now, if the Sarah Mashkim is going to tell Paro that he told the dream to Yosef because Yosef asked him, that would indicate that Yosef is a professional. Therefore, you're guilty for not telling me about Yosef until now. He's saying, why did I tell him the dream? Not because I felt that he might know, or because he's a professional dream interpreter. And that's why he said, tell me the dream, I'll interpret it for you. We just happened to be talking. We were just inmates together. What do inmates do together in prison? They share stories and they talk about stuff together. So he's basically describing the events that led him to relate the dream to Yosef in the first place. Wasn't in terms of him coming to Yosef as an interpreter, waiting for a professional diagnosis. Rather, he was just happened to be chatting in jail, and therefore he's mitigating again the fact that he didn't tell the king about Yosef until now. So now we have a problem. Because he's so desperate to point out Yosef's inadequacy, he's saying he's not wise, he doesn't have sorcery, he's not a prophet, he didn't use methods of stargazing. So then how did he know to interpret the dreams and predict what the dreams meant? Obviously, he's got to have some kind of way to do this. Therefore, we say, this is what we were saying before, that it's not a big deal to interpret our dreams. What he pointed out as an explanation in the dreams is just because he saw it in the dream itself. He simply interpreted what was actually in the dream, as we said before. The one that he saw, in that the dream said that he's going to serve Paro his drinks once again. That's how he interpreted it. And as mentioned earlier, if you have a dream that birds are going to eat the bread on your head, it means they're going to eat the flesh of your head. So basically, this is the whole elaborate scheme and theme of the Sarah Mashkim to describe Yosef as inadequate, incapable, and having fluked and managed to interpret a very simple dream. But then the pasuk continues. This is the closing statement of the Sarah Mashkim to Paro. Vayhi kasher patar lanu, as he interpreted to us. Kenaya, this is what happened. Otiye shival kani, me you returned, or Paro returned. V'ototala, and he was hung, he was executed. Ulubali Omar HaMelech, what's he saying here? So now that you've pushed the agenda, Yosef being completely inadequate, and it all just was a fluke and whatever, so why then you mentioned him? If this is how you feel, then why are you mentioning this stupid fool to me to be a solution to my current predicament? On the other hand, going back to the other side of the argument, that we should respect Yosef's ability in dream interpreting. The original anger at the servants was equal. Me and the baker, they were both equal. Not only that, I was put into jail first. So we're saying as follows. On the one hand, the dream is very simple. But on the other hand, if he's using what he can see and take note of in terms of what was happening around him regarding these two men, he shouldn't have thought, he shouldn't have guessed and fluked in his interpretation that the baker is going to be killed. He could have just said that the baker is not going to be brought back to his job. But why would he need to say, if not that he actually knows what he's talking about, that the baker is going to be killed? He doesn't have to say that the dreams are complete polar opposites. He's going to be back, not only taken out of prison, but given his job back, and he's not only going to be not be taken out of prison, he's actually going to be executed. So these are like complete polar opposites in terms of what's going to happen with these two people. Even though on the outside, without what it seemed to be to begin with, was that there was equal problem with both of them, and not only that, the mashkim was worse. So the fact that he had the ability to predict the fact that it's going to end up on such opposite spectrums is indicative that he knows. So after all of this, the Sarah Mashkin has basically presented a very on-the-fence analysis of Yosef's abilities, and he basically took himself out of the picture so that he doesn't have anyone come back to him with complaints. So now we're going back to the question of what lemor means. Why did I wait until now to mention anything? So he's telling Paro, the only thing I know for sure, What can I tell you? The only thing that I'm sure about, one thing I'm certain about, is the fact the fact that I sinned, that's the only thing that is actually a fact in this next statement I'm about to say. Regarding Yosef's abilities, that I'm actually unsure of. The fact that Yosef is able to help the king, that is questionable. Maybe he doesn't know anything. So because the sin is a fact, and the benefit of Yosef being able to help the king is questionable, so that's why I didn't feel adequate to mention my sins in terms of what the value that Yosef's going to bring being so questionable. The only thing I can tell you for sure is that my sins are being mentioned. Why does he? There's another way of explaining this whole theme, is that it doesn't say Paro Katzaf, it doesn't say Katzafta. He's talking to Paro now. Why doesn't he say you were angered? So you could say that he's not talking to the king, he's talking to the king in third person. But another explanation is that he's talking to a messenger. He's not talking to the king. Because he sinned and he has to bring up his sins, he's referring to the messenger. He's sending a messenger to speak to the king on his behalf, in order that he doesn't have to bring up his sins directly with the king. So he's saying, Paro Katzaf. He's telling the messenger, you go to Paro, because this is what happened. Paro got angry, and then Paro brought back the butlers. Shal ken amru rabbeinu shechozer el Yosef. So the rabbi says as follows. The rabbis, because of this question of why it says, the pasuk doesn't say, Oto haishavta al-kani v'oto talita. If you're talking to somebody directly, why is he not referring to him in second person, saying you did this? So this is a question that's so obvious that the rabbis use this as a midrash to say that who executed the baker, and who returned and exonerated the drinks guy? Yosef did that. Why? Because the power of dream interpretation is so powerful. However the dream is interpreted, that's what happens. It's irrelevant really what the dream was intended to mean. It's all about what the interpreter says. So that's why this is a proof that the wording here needs to be understood. So now Rav Moshe is telling us a different explanation of what this pasuk means. That Hayav Shadafarash Omra Lemor, so meaning that the Sarah Mashkim is talking to a messenger. And he's telling this messenger, you go now with the following message to tell the king the following. Why is he doing that? Because he doesn't want to directly have to mention his sins face to face to the king. So out of humility and bashfulness for his previous sin, he's sending his message with a messenger. The Sarah Mashkim spoke. Who did he speak to? El Paro Lemor, with the one who is going to speak to Paro. Umamaro el Shalishu. He's talking to a third party. And because I need to mention my sins is the reason I'm not directly speaking to Paro. You should tell the king the fact that Paro was angry, and you'll tell it to him in first person, in second person, and I'm just telling you what to say. Or another way to understand lemor, this will be the last explanation of what lemor is. Because the Sarah Mashkim presented the fact of his uncertainty whether Yosef is actually able to interpret dreams or not, or whether he just was a one-time lucky fluke. So now he's saying, I present these facts to Paro, the two considerations on how to understand Yosef's ability to interpret my dream. And what I'm saying is, Paro can now decide what to do with the given facts. I leave Paro to decide whether he's actually a worthy contestant to be brought into the picture. Paro can now decide whatever he sees fit. Im yomar shu chacham yishlach harav. If Paro feels like he's actually wise and able to do the job, he will call him. Or mikraya v'enechem, maybe Paro will understand that it was just a fluke and he'll let him stay languish in jail. The mashkim spoke in order for Paro to say. It's for him to say. The Sar Mashkim himself was uncertain. And so this is the end of this theme in the Parsha regarding the Sar Mashkim's relation of Yosef's interpretation of the dream. We'll continue next time, Bezrat Hashem.